Ryan Lawrence tweeting out that the lineup is out. Rhys Hoskins will bat 7th and play in left field, and he joins us now here on the Sports Bash. He's the Phillies beat reporter for Philly Voice. Ryan, glad to have you on, especially with so many things taking place.
Yeah, for sure, Pete. How are you?
We're doing well up here, thanks, or down here, depending on which way you look at the geography. And we're excited to see Rhys Hoskins and what he can do. This wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is a guy that's been putting up numbers, that have been deserving of a call-up pretty much all year. And it's coming off of a double-A year when, he was really one of the best players in the Eastern League. And so he answered some questions very early that, it wasn't just because he was playing in those hitter-friendly ballparks in the Eastern League, but no, this guy that can legitimately play anywhere. Probably the most encouraging thing isn't that the power numbers were back just like they were last year, but that his walks were up and his strikeouts were down. So this is a guy that can hit. He's just a flat-out hitter, disciplined hitter. So, yeah, he's more than ready for this challenge.
How about the left field challenge, though? Because this is another case of sort of blockage taking place for a guy's natural position. But, hey, if you can hit, they're going to find a place for you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what Dusty Watson, the manager of AAA, said the other day when, this quote-unquote experiment began on Monday when he went out there and played left field for the first time in a game since his freshman year in college. So it's been a while. But then, he just did play 3 straight games down there in left field at AAA. It's just a temporary solution. They're not trying to make him a left fielder. What they have is 2 young players they want to continue to evaluate, and in Tommy Joseph and Rhys Hoskins. And, it's definitely not time to give up on Tommy Joseph yet. He's a guy that only began playing every day this year. Remember, last year he was in a timeshare, I guess, for the position with Ryan Howard. So, yeah, it makes sense to make sure both of those guys are getting reps. And, the thing is you're eventually going to have to make a decision on it, but you don't have to do that now. It makes sense to keep playing Joseph because you continue to pad his numbers. And then, in this offseason, you can make a better decision. You're probably going to be better able to move Tommy Joseph this winter if he finishes with, say, 20, 25 home runs and some decent numbers. Or you can move Rhys Hoskins. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but, you got to consider everything. If you're going to package a few players together and try to get a superstar in a trade, I don't think there is an untouchable in the organization other than Sixto Sanchez. Anyway, this is a short-term solution, and it's fine. Pat Burrell broke into the big leagues as a first baseman, even though he wasn't playing first base at AAA, and he eventually made his way out to be their everyday left fielder. So there is a precedent for putting a guy in an unnatural position to make his major league debut. It's more about his bat right now than where he fits on the field.
Ryan Lawrence with us, the Phillies beat reporter and beat writer for PhillyVoice.com. And Ryan will pivot to the current team. And boy, if they could play the Braves 162 games, right, they might be a playoff team. Who knows, right? Their success against the Braves is almost uncanny.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about playing in this division is that there really is only one really good team in the division, and they're one of the elite teams in the league in the Washington Nationals. But then the other 3 teams that the Phillies get to play aren't necessarily world beaters. And so, yeah, it is an opportunity to kind of rack up those wins and maybe avoid losing 100 games, which, obviously they're on pace to do. They've played better baseball since the All-Star break. And I haven't looked exactly on the schedule to see how many of their games are against NL East opponents in the next 7 weeks, but usually you do play most of your division in September. So, yeah, they have an opportunity here to do what they did a couple years ago, which is avoid 100 losses. Maybe that's not a huge thing, but it is something.
Ryan, Nick Costco here. Do you expect any other call-ups this season now that the Phillies might get a better look at their possible future lineup down the road now that they have a guy like Rhys Hoskins at the big league club? Do you expect them to start actually calling up multiple prospects in the last 2 months of the season?
Well, they have called up 3 prospects now, and between Hoskins, Nick Williams, and Jorge Alfaro, they're all here. They've called up pitchers all throughout the year. Eflin is back. Pivetta. So, I don't know. I don't think so. They may add some guys in September, as clubs always do with September call-ups. But, you look at the team on the field right now, I'm not sure where anybody else is going to play. I don't think that they're going to bench Freddie Galvis. They're certainly not going to bench Cesar Hernandez. So, neither of the middle infielders at AAA are going to come up here and take these guys' job in the last 7 weeks of the season. Both of those guys I guess Kingery has been more consistent, but even, he could probably work on his plate discipline skills, and he's not coming up here for a myriad of reasons, including the fact that they don't have to put him on the 40-man this winter, and they do have to put a lot of prospects on the 40-man, so it's kind of a numbers crunch. But yeah, I really don't see any other position players because they've already got 4 outfielders, or if you want to consider Hoskins an outfielder now, and Altair's on the DL, so you already are potentially going to have a little bit of a logjam when Altair comes back. And like I said, I really don't see any other spot on the diamond. They're going to continue to run Cesar Hernandez, Freddie Galvis, and Michael Franco out there as they should. I think fans should just be excited that Rhys Hoskins and Nick Williams are in the everyday lineup. But, you can't have everything, but that's a pretty good place to start.
Switching to guys who have been in the everyday lineup so far this season, Odubel Herrera has been very hot as of late. I mean, this guy was subject to trade rumors, especially during some of his struggles. What do you make of this of his most recent performance, and what does this mean for his future in Philly? Since this guy was even considered that he might not be on the roster a couple years down the line.
Yeah, I don't know about any of that. I don't remember any trade rumors. I mean, this is a guy that they signed long-term this winter. He's the only guy that they made a commitment to say that you are going to be a part of our future when they gave him a long-term deal in December, a team-friendly long-term deal at that. No, I think they've always identified him as a guy that's going to be a part of their core. I mean, he doesn't get appreciated nearly as much as he should, and I know he gets mental lapses from more often than not, throughout the course of the 160-game season. But the reality is for 2.5 months now, since the beginning of June, he's been one of the best hitters in baseball. I believe I saw a stat where he has a better slugging percentage in that span than Freddie Freeman. So, I mean, you're talking about a guy that is underappreciated, probably, if you look at the entirety of his numbers and everything that he can do on the baseball field. I wrote about him 2 weeks ago, and the fact that, people just need to calm down a little bit. Yeah, he does make mental errors, for sure. But I would say more often than not, if you look at the totality of what he is a player, he's helping them win games more often than he's forcing them to lose games, because he's just a dynamic player on offense, as we've seen in the last 2.5 months, and he plays a pretty darn good center field. So I think this always brings to mind this feeling among fans that they always want the next best thing. And, prospects aren't guaranteed to come up and steal anybody's jobs. None of them are guaranteed to be successes at the big league level. More often than not, prospects don't make it. So if you have a proven guy on the big league roster that's been one of the best outfielders in baseball in the last 2.5 years, that's a good thing. And so I think Odubel Herrera for sure should be a part of their future this team going forward. I mean, I'm not saying he's an untouchable. I think that you can consider trading anybody, but I don't think this team is in any position to trade guys that are providing offense, because we know that's been a struggle in the last 6 years to get offense.
Hey, Ryan, it's Josh. I want to ask you about Jerad Eickhoff switching over to the pitching staff. This is a guy in his last 7 starts. He has 38 strikeouts and 40 2/3 innings. He seems to be turning it around. He had a really rough start to the year. He was getting almost no run support at times, and now he's finally getting some run support. And because he's pitching well, especially since the All-Star game, it seems like he's getting more confident, and the team's getting more confident with him on the mound.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is just kind of the natural progression of a young pitcher. I mean, most young pitchers go through growing pains and struggles. Aside from like the legitimate number one type guys, even Cole Hamels, I guess, in 2009, had quote unquote struggles. I don't think he was as bad as maybe people made him out to be. But if you get beyond those elite starters and you go to that second tier, the guys like Nola, the guys like Eickhoff, I think you're going to see that most of them at some point early in their career, in the first 3 years, go through some kind of slump or struggles. So I think it's natural. I think that this guy is a bulldog on the mound, and I think that he has really good secondary stuff. And when he can command that secondary stuff, he's a pretty good pitcher. So I think that's what we're seeing, that he struggled with that a little bit toward the beginning of the year, and he's kind of coming into his own. But that's, again, the nature of a 160-game season. Even getting back to Odubel Herrera, almost every big leaguer, again, aside from the superstars, is going to have a slump at some point during a 162-game season. So, I think it's only natural. And, obviously they'd like Eickhoff to consider or to continue to finish strong, because then it helps them going forward to know that, okay, we have a couple definite pieces for this rotation going into 2018.
Sticking with the rotation going into 2018, Aaron Nola, he's approaching the numbers he had last year in terms of starts in innings pitched. He's already passed the innings pitch, actually. He has 2 more starts to get the 20 he had last year. The 3.12 ERA is very encouraging to me. What's even more encouraging to me, Ryan, is the fact that he has less hits than innings pitch, and he has more strikeouts than innings pitch, which is telling me that he is really learning how to pitch at the big league level.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a guy that probably got undersold from the day that he got drafted. I think, everybody was saying that, when they were trying to say why the Phillies picked him, a lot of people were saying, oh, he was just the most major league ready of the pitchers in the draft, and that, maybe he didn't project to be a number one, but he could be a guy that could pitch, somewhere toward the top of your rotation. I mean, I think maybe they sold him short. I think this is a guy that has pretty good stuff. He's not like the typical, 6'4", he's not out of central casting when you think of guys who are, obvious number ones or aces. But I think this guy's a better pitcher, again, than maybe that he was given credit for the day he was drafted. And so, I think what we're seeing is the talent is showing. I mean, the guy has a ridiculous curveball. He throws hard enough. He seems to have pretty good command of his pitches. He's locked in right now. But you know what? He was doing this for the first 25 starts of his big league career, too. I think people forget that he was really good for his first year or 11 months in the big leagues. And then, he went through a little bit of a slump early last summer before he went on the DL. But again, I think that happens to most young pitchers. So he looks really good, and that's a good sign because the Phillies need players to build around. And if you were to look on this 25-man roster right now and start circling guys that you think will be here when this team is contending again, I think he'd probably be the first guy I would circle.
Ryan Lawrence with us, the Phillies beat reporter from PhillyVoice.com. You can read his stuff on Twitter as well, at Ryan Lawrence21 is his Twitter handle. And Ryan, Cesar Hernandez, a guy to me that sometimes gets overlooked when people are trying to talk about key players on the Phillies or how so-and-so doing. It seems, as I look at Cesar Hernandez, this is a guy that anytime he misses time, the team tends to go in a little bit of a nosedive. Is Cesar Hernandez not a guy that's ranked high enough by most of the average fans? And how important is he? Is he a glue guy to these Phillies?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about how it seems like there's this, and I think this isn't just Phillies fans. I think this is just sports fans all across the board, is that everybody kind of wants that next best thing. And so, we're done with you if you don't impress us, right off the bat. And if there's a really good prospect that plays your position, moving on. And I'm not sure that's the best mentality to have. As we're seeing what the Phillies are doing now, they're putting Hoskins on the roster, even though it's not at his natural position because they still like the other guy. So that's okay. That's fine. You'd want to have as many good players as you could have. I mean, as I wrote 2 or 3 months ago, they were flirting with the idea of trying Kingery out at other positions. Why? Because it would be great to have him and Cesar Hernandez on the field at the same time because they're both pretty good players. So you don't have to just, get rid of one guy. You can find a way to keep both guys because, as we see, again, they have a need for offensive players. This needs to be a better offense than it's been the last 5 or 6 years. But, I think Cesar Hernandez is an example of what happens a lot in baseball, is that a guy needs a couple years to kind of get his feet under him and to become the player that he can be. Not everybody arrives at the big leagues as a finished product. Most don't. Daniel Murphy comes to mind. Justin Turner comes to mind. How about on this roster? Aaron Altair comes to mind. So, a lot of times guys need to kind of get that everyday playing time in the big leagues for a year or two to grow as players. And I think we've seen that with Cesar Hernandez. I tweeted out, I retweeted one of the stat guys on Twitter. He posted Cesar Hernandez's numbers in his last 162 games, which is obviously going back to last year. His on-base percentage, I think, was around 390, or between 380 and 390. So this is a guy that is a really good leadoff hitter. And that's a good thing to have. A guy that's getting on base, that can run a little bit, and plays adequate defense at second base. So, I think there's a lot to like with Cesar Hernandez, to be honest with you.
Yep, 357. I saw that tweet, and that led me to be like, oh, yeah, Cesar. Go ahead, Josh.
Ryan, I want to ask you about Clintack, the guy who a lot of people have had positive and negative things to say about over the years. Since hindsight is 2020, looking back now at the trade deadline, what do you think of the moves Clintack made, considering everything that's happened since the trade deadline?
I think the moves are fine. I mean, what he had were, guys on one-year deals, veterans, that, were somewhat attractive to varying degrees. The fact that he was able to get rid of all four of them, I think, gives him an A for the trade deadline because, again, he didn't have a Cole Hamels to deal with. He didn't have any kind of big chip that was going to bring back a lot or that he had to move or that he had to maximize value on. He had really Pat Neshek was a nice chip, and then he had three guys who, again, I wasn't certain they were going to be able to trade Howie Kendrick because he can't stay on the field. He played, 35 games with the Phillies this year? Joaquin Benoit, I don't know. It doesn't excite me a whole lot, but maybe they were able to trade him. Jeremy Hellickson, I think that every team needs pitching, but obviously wasn't pitching that great leading up to the trade deadline. So, I would have to give Klentak a passing grade for sure to be able to move those guys. But, he didn't get back top-tier prospects. But, again, that's because what he had to trade was guys that were kind of average to below average players. He did fine. And I guess the most important thing he did was he cleared roster space for some of these other young players that they want to see. Jessen Carrion is on the roster in part because Joaquin Benoit is no longer here. Rhys Hoskins is here in part because Howie Kendrick is no longer here. So that was probably the most important thing that Klentak did, was move guys to create spots for younger players.
He is Ryan Lawrence, and the Phillies are home tonight against the New York Mets. And, of course, Ryan, you had a great tweet, too, with the red 10 behind home plate there is Darren Dalton, the sad passing away of Darren Dalton earlier in the week. And you said they're great at that kind of thing in the tribute. So Alumni Weekend, boy, last week at this time we're ripping the Phillies for what they're doing with Alumni Weekend and some other guy that used to play for them that wore 14, and now a week later they pivot into what should be an emotional weekend. What's going to take place, and what were your thoughts about Darren Dalton?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of people that, are probably listening, I grew up watching that team in 93. I think I was 16 or 17 years old. And, it was really the only team of my childhood. I was too young to remember the 83 team. From 84 until 2000, there was really only one memorable year, and it was 93. And obviously Dalton was a huge part of that team. It was sad. But, we kind of all saw this coming. He was diagnosed with brain cancer a few years ago, 4 years ago, I guess. And rarely do people survive. It's a terrible. I had a friend who was in his early 30s who passed in September from it. The grandmother passed from brain cancer. So it's a terrible, terrible disease. It's just tragic. He was very young, too young. And, it'll be a sad weekend because the Phillies, they've lost quite a few in just a short span here. Within the last 6 months, they've lost three people that are on the Wall of Fame with Dalton, Dallas Green, and Jim Bunning. So it'll be a somber weekend because no one's going into the Wall of Fame. But, maybe it'll be a good time to remember, three people who were, instrumental in this team's success through, different time periods in the franchise's history.
And a bit of bright news, too, at least to start things off, is the news official today. Rhys Hoskins makes the jump up to the big leagues. He'll bat seventh tonight and play in left field. Hey, Ryan, thanks so much for joining us. We certainly appreciate any time you can come on board with us and give us all your wisdom and knowledge. And I'll tell my niece to find some Clemson tchotchke for you down there when she's going to school down there, and that'll be your payment when I see you next time. Okay, bud?
Sounds good. You should get to a game down there.
You and me. Let's do it.
Yeah, man. All right.